Warning, the following program has been rated T for truth.
You can't handle the truth.
Oh, we think you can. Welcome to the Naked Truth Report with your host, truth warrior and mythbuster Kathleen Wells. The place where we distinguish fact from fiction, where data is used to drive points home, and where Kathleen takes the position that Democrats and black politicians have destroyed black America. Welcome to the Naked Truth Report. Now, your host, Kathleen Wells.
Hi, Truth Warriors. It's me, Kathleen Wells. I'm happy to have you this evening. One of the reasons why I said I could no longer be with the Democratic Party was when I first started this show about 3.5 years ago, is when I realized the issue of illegal aliens. I was listening to the Barack Laurie show, and he says illegal immigration. Why do we embrace and accept the terms? Why do we allow Democrats, the left, to decipher or determine the terms, the words that we use to define? Why do they get to set the narrative and the definition of things? They're illegal aliens. They're not here. They're not immigrants. An immigrant is someone who is not subject to deportation. If you're subject to deportation, you're not an immigrant. You're an illegal alien, yes. And that's what I want to talk about today with my guest, Dr. Roy Beck, who is the founder of Numbers USA. It's going to be a fantastic show. He'll be on in a minute. But yes, immigration was the original reason, or the first, or the essential, or priority reason why I said I could no longer support the Democratic Party. Because I looked at the numbers and I looked at the research, starting with people like Barbara Jordan. Remember Barbara Jordan? Also, Dr. Claude Anderson talked about it. Frank Morris, Terry Anderson, and Patrick. These are folks that I played excerpts from them. Isola Foster talked about it. Who else? Father Patrick Basio talked about it. When you look at the data and see the numbers matter, numbers make a difference. Numbers are relevant. It matters, the numbers. So when you look at the numbers, and also when you learn the history, Frank Morris told us that when he wrote an article about how in the 1800s, Frederick Douglass, Booker T. Washington, W.E.B. Du Bois, and Marcus Garvey talked about how high immigration adversely impacted Black America in the 1800s. You see, they wrote articles about it. The academicians in the 1800s talked about how high immigration were displacing Black American workers in the 1800s. And today, and Barbara Jordan talked about it in the 1980s and in the 1990s. In fact, even Coretta Scott King talked about that. How high immigration and illegal aliens supplant or adversely impact Black American workers, correct? So that was the initial thing I can no longer support these Democrats because they're working against Black Americans. Why would I vote for a party that works against Black Americans? Why would I do that? Anyway, I'd like to welcome my guest. I'm delighted to have Roy Beck on the show. I met Roy Beck about when I first started doing the radio show. And before I met him, I had seen his presentation where he uses gumballs. You got to look at it on YouTube. Just use the keywords Roy Beck, Numbers USA, and gumballs on YouTube. And it's just very impressive. It's graphic. He makes the point very clear. It's dramatic. So Roy Beck, welcome to the Naked Truth Report.
Well, good morning. Good morning. It's almost morning here. Good evening.
Well, you're used to saying good morning. I'm delighted to have you. I met you about 3.5 years ago when I started the show, and I was very impressed with your gumball illustration. And so now we're going to talk about Biden's bill. It's like we took two steps. We took 2 steps forward on the immigration issue with Trump, only to come now 1 step back, so to speak. You think that's an apt analogy? Talk about this Biden bill and how it's not a good thing.
Well, With us, it is about the numbers. Our organization is called Numbers USA, and because we really believe it all starts with that. Almost regardless of who you bring here, what the qualities of them are, if the numbers are small, it probably doesn't make much difference. If we brought in, let's just look at a couple of numbers. Between World War II and the 70s, we were bringing in about 250,000 legal immigrants a year. The illegal flow was fairly small. So 250,000, 250,000. Since 1990, we've been bringing in 1 million a year. So 4 times more than we used to bring in. So if anybody, of course I know any of your listeners that are in California, they know exactly. They've felt it. They've seen it. But you have a 4-time increase. That's gigantic. So now, all right, since 1990, California has been totally transformed. Many parts of the United States have been transformed, changed from 1 million a year. Well, what Mr. Biden has proposed in his bill is that we increase legal immigration to 2.4 million a year, from 1 million a year to 2.4 million a year. So he wants to increase it by more than twice. So basically 2.5 times. Every year, he wants to bring in 2.5 million a year, 2.4 million a year. So that's incredible. He wants to go from the 11 million, about 10 to 11 million a decade, to 24 million a decade, 24 million over the next 10 years. Plus, he wants to give lifetime work permits and the vote and all welfare benefits to all illegal aliens in the country. And that could be, the official estimate's 11 million. It could be many million more than that. But what we know is, and this is I'm going to stop on the numbers here, but California has around 40 million people in it. Your listeners know that's a lot of people. They can feel it. They can see it. Maybe about 40 million people. And I'm not quite sure. I haven't checked the numbers, but I think maybe about a quarter of that are immigrants. Mm-hmm. Well, what Mr. Biden is proposing is over the next 10 years to bring in about 40 million more people. So in other words, create a second California filled entirely with the same number of people that are in California now, but all foreign citizens. It's incredible. It really, when you think about it, it seems insane. It seems like the plan of an insane person. So I guess we're going to need to talk about why would they do that?
Right. Well, and you say that people can feel it. Well, I'm thinking some people in California can't feel it because they keep voting for these Democrats who keep wanting to bring in more. Numbers matter. Look at our freeways. We can see the traffic starting up again this evening when I drove into the studio. Jobs matter. When I used to always say in Los Angeles, to get a construction job, you must speak Spanish now. You see,
it's of course that's one of the most insidious things right now is that California, as you and I know, and I know that many of your listeners know, California was the great promised land during the Great Migration of Black Americans out of the South, starting mainly during World War II and after World War II. It was an incredibly different place for them to move from the South during that period, and opportunity. There were great increases in income. Didn't mean that most Black Americans got rich or anything, but when you're moving from subsistence kinds of wages on or near the plantations where your ancestors have been slaves, in a period of apartheid in the South, and then moved from there to Los Angeles and other parts of California, formed communities, political power, commercial power, and now the children, the grandchildren, those people who came out here can't get a job, one job after another, unless they can speak somebody else's language. To be able to speak a foreign language to get jobs that what you just described. It's an incredible insult, first of all, and injustice, isn't it, to do that, given that history.
Yes, the history is important. I always say history and context is important. You guys know I grew up in Leimert Park. When I was growing up, there were black neighborhoods: Inglewood, Baldwin Hills, Lafayette Square. These were neighborhoods, the Crenshaw area, Watts, Compton. These were neighborhoods where blacks lived. Working class / middle class blacks lived in these neighborhoods. Well, we no longer have we no longer have these neighborhoods. And, for instance, our children cannot buy homes they can't afford homes in Leimert Park like our parents did in Leimert Park because they go for over $1 million. There's a house on Buckingham that is going for $1.2 million. Can the children of black Americans afford a home for $1.2 million? In Baldwin Hills, they go for over Baldwin Hills and Windsor Hills, they go for over $1.5 million. I think Inglewood, they probably start maybe mid $500,000-$600,000. Can the children of can the children afford homes in these neighborhoods? That's the question. This is why I say I don't know if black Americans are feeling it, because they keep voting for policies that supplant them, that push them down, that keep them relegated to a permanent underclass. They keep voting for those policies. So I don't think they connect the dots. They obviously don't feel it.
Well, I think they're feeling it, but they are misdirected. I think most, and it's not just black voters. There are voters up and down the line that have been misdirected by politicians and various kind of lobbyists. Each group has a different reason for it. I'm not an African American, so I can't. I'm speaking. I'm speaking as a European mongrel from the Missouri Ozarks. But my sense, from having worked on this full time for over 30 years now, and having worked with a number of African Americans like yourself, who totally get it, and who themselves have been working on this for a quarter century. They're kind of the outliers right now. They're very, very different from the members of the Congressional Black Caucus, who are all Democrats. Those particular Democrats have made a decision that well, let me say it another way. I don't believe that the Democrats who are members of the Black Congressional Caucus are wanting to keep black Americans out of jobs, which is what their policies do. I don't think they're wanting to depress the wages of black Americans who don't have more than a high school education. They're the ones that are hurt the most. I don't think that's what they want to do, but I think they're willing to do it because something is more important to them right now. And the two things I think that are most important to them is to create what they feel might be a permanent Democratic majority. They know that most Democrats, the vast majority of most immigrants that come into the country have always voted Democratic. Now, they vote Democratic because this is true in any country, by the way. Immigrants that go into a country overwhelmingly vote for the party that supports the most government and the most government services. There's a number of reasons for that. I'm going to get into it right now, but the statistics, the records show that. So it's interesting. It doesn't matter where they come from or what country they go to. They prefer the party that provides more government. So the Congressional Black Caucus knows that the voting propensity of immigrants, and remember, 1 million a year, are getting the vote. are getting gotten green cards, getting citizenship, getting the vote. So immigration is a international democratic voter registration program. And the idea is that if you get enough immigrants into the country, that you will get a permanent Democratic majority. That's the hope. That's their hope and thought. And the thought is that once they have that, then they can pass all the legislation to help unemployed blacks and poor working class blacks. That is their thought. But until that happens, they're willing to drive down the wages and to keep blacks out of jobs during that time.
That's crazy thinking. That's crazy thinking. Well,
but that's what they're willing to do.
I mean, that's selfish. In other words, they just want to maintain power and control. Who knows what they will do once they get a permanent Democratic majority? Who knows what they'll do at that point? I mean, black Americans will be so small in number at that point. They'll be so homeless and relegated to a permanent underclass, it won't even matter. They won't be able to pull themselves up with any kind of help at that point. It will be too late.
And I think the second thing is that there's a thought that by having a larger and larger percentage of the country that is non-white, that it'll be a better place to live. This is a feeling that I think it's based on kind of a philosophy that the European majority is evil, and you've got to undermine it.
Right. That's something that I wanted to ask you about. Just playing the devil's advocate. They say that if you're against immigration and illegal aliens, you are /racist/ white supremacist. So address that.
Well, first of all, I think it's organizations like my own, and frankly, every major organization I know of that fights for lower immigration numbers explicitly says that they think that immigration should be colorblind. That is, it's not like 100 years ago where there were large movements who wanted not so much less immigration, they just wanted the immigration to all come from certain parts of the world. Mm-hmm. And they wanted to be, 100 years ago, there were big groups that wanted not only for it to all be white, but for it to be North European white, not even Southern European white. Mm. Well, it's very different today. Nobody is saying that we should limit immigration to any continent or race. So there's nothing that is race based about wanting less immigration. Now, another thing that people say is, well, you want to stop the country from becoming a minority white. Well, the Census Bureau says that even if we stop immigration tomorrow, all immigration, that in another 30 years, whites would be the minority in the country. That's because of the last 40 years of high immigration has set things in motion. So that's out of the barn. The idea that America is going to remain a majority white, majority European descent majority, it's not going to happen. You can tell by looking at what's in the schools. So this is not the point. The point is what is good for all of us. And Barbara Jordan, who was, I know that many of your listeners are younger, may not know the name or may not know that much about her, but Barbara Jordan was herself a liberal Democrat, African-American from Texas. And she was, President Clinton appointed her to head a commission to see what should we do about immigration in this country. That was the middle 90s. That was 25 years ago. And her big deal was, she said, I just wish that we wouldn't have any kind of Americans, but just Americans. I wish we wouldn't have Italian Americans and Black Americans and Hispanic Americans and Asian Americans and Greek Americans. I wish we could just all be Americans. And so that was her position. But her deal is that immigration, she looked at it and she goes, $1 million a year, it's too much. We should cut it. And her proposals would have cut it in half to about $500,000 a year. But what she saw was that this high immigration undercut all the people who are the most vulnerable in this country. And if we look at the statistics to see who's most vulnerable in the country and divide them by groups, Black Americans had the highest percentage of people who are vulnerable, who are living on the edge or below the edge. So anything that is harmful to vulnerable Americans is especially harmful to Black Americans.
Right.
Now,
The thing of it, see, many Black Americans buy into the idea if America goes down or if white Americans go down, Black Americans will go up. I think they think that way in some weird sort of way, but they don't realize that you're bringing in other groups. You're competing. Life is a competition, okay? And racism is the competition between groups. So, if Arabs are coming in and Indians are coming in and Nigerians are coming in and Latinos are coming in, they're not working for the benefit of Black Americans. They're working for their group's benefit. That's human nature. Okay, but for some reason, Democrats sell to Black Americans that just be against white folks. If you're against white folks, that's good. We're people of color. That Indians and Arabs and Latinos and Blacks, we're all in this together against the white man. That's what Democrats sell to Black Americans, and Black Americans buy it. But that goes against human nature. They don't understand human nature. Kamala Harris hired 2 Indian Americans, okay? And I saw a program where they think, Black Americans think Kamala Harris is an African American.
She's an Indian Caribbean American, isn't she?
Yeah, she's not an African American. Her ancestors did not come from America. As Black Americans, ancestors have been here since the founding of America.
Exactly. No, she's exactly. She's it's a different culture and all that. Well, listen, everybody. Yeah, I mean, you're exactly right. You've got people. It's called ethnic networking. When immigrants, regardless of where they come, what part of the world they come from, if they start a business, overwhelmingly, they hire people that are from their country. And I'm writing a book right now, and so I'm in the middle of a lot of research. But it is incredible how much more immigrant Americans discriminate against hiring Blacks than white Americans do. Mm-hmm. White Americans are much more likely to hire African Americans than are immigrant Americans. Because immigrant Americans, for the most part, just hire from their own group.
And because we're Americans, we have American values. You see, immigrants have another language, they have another culture that they've been indoctrinated with, not the American culture.
There's another thing here too, and that is, this is a whole other subject, and I'm sure you and your guests have a lot of opinions about it. But there's the question about, okay, given what slavery did for 250 years, in terms of sort of the startup for African Americans' family history, and then given the fact that 90% of all African Americans around 1900, 1910, 1920 still lived in the South. It was only when they cut immigration in 1924 that Black Americans were able to start moving out of the South. Let's talk about that in a minute. But given the fact that for about another 100 years after slavery, most Black Americans lived under the Jim Crow apartheid, it really was not until the last 50, 70 years that the descendants of slavery kind of had a chance to start trying to catch up. So there's a strong, I was going to college during the time that the civil rights movement was coming to its head, and part of the idea of that was, look, there's a need to make up for these 350 years and give some special opportunity for catch-up. Now, that took quite a hold on people because most white people in this country, whether or not their families owned slaves, and most of them didn't because they're really, like in the South, there wasn't that big of a percentage of people who owned slaves. Most of them were just poor white workers. But the fact is that most people in this country, white people, had ancestors that lived during the time of slavery or lived during the time of the Jim Crow South. And so basically you had, at that point, about 80% of the population was white, who the question was, can you give a little to make up a little bit for the 10% of the population is black? Well, now, what happens whenever it's the minority of the population is white? And is there a sense among all these immigrant groups that they owe something, that they need to step aside just a little bit for a little catch-up for the descendants of American slaves?
No, they have no idea. They know nothing about it. There's the music. We're going to take a break, and when we come back from the break, we're going to continue the conversation with Roy Beck, founder of Numbers USA, and we'll open up the phone lines. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Naked Truth Report. My guest is Roy Beck, who is the founder of Numbers USA. Yes, numbers matter. Numbers matter. And I like what you were talking about, how blacks were coming in from the how they were having an opportunity to catch up after the 60s. You see, this is what I talked about before, is that right after Reconstruction, we had black codes and meritorious convict leasing and all this stuff. And blacks were still behind the eight ball until we had the civil rights, and then we had Jim Crow, and then we had the civil rights movement. But right after the Civil Rights Act, the Immigration Act of 1964 was enacted. And that put us back. You see, am I right?
Well, absolutely. And, look at the last 200 years. Mass immigration, the first mass immigration began around 1820. That's when the government began keeping records. Why did we not have mass immigration before? It wasn't until the 1820s till this travel across the ocean became safe enough. It wasn't particularly safe, but it was safer, cheaper, faster than it had been, and that's when we started filling up. And one decade after another, you can see where free blacks in the North who were starting to get a foothold, they lost the foothold because you would have these waves of immigration. Well, the big deal is that finally, 1924, Congress, both the House and Senate, passed a bill to dramatically cut immigration, and the president signed it. And it cut immigration by over 2/3. That's a big deal, to cut it by 2/3. And it stayed low from 1924 till the 1965 Act that you just mentioned. Now, during those 40 years of low immigration, for the first time in history, black Americans, their wages, their incomes, went up faster than white Americans. White Americans had about a 2.5 time, like a 250% increase in annual income during that 40 years. Black Americans had a 400%, okay? 250% increase for white Americans, 400% increase for black Americans. So that was a great 40 years, 25 to 65. Black Americans did better. It was a tight labor market. And the tight labor market was because low immigration. And as you said, 1965, they passed the 64 and the 65 Civil Rights Acts, which were great improvements for African Americans. But at the same time, they passed an Immigration Act that started mass immigration all over again. And what happened is that wonderful improvement into the middle class. Only 1 out of every 4 black Americans was in the middle class in 1924. In 1970, 3 out of every 4 black Americans in the middle class. And then with that high immigration, the move into the middle class stopped. And
exactly.
Basically, because black Americans still weren't where they needed to be. It's
right.
just they were a lot better than they had been. And it stopped. The movement stopped, and it's been going somewhat downhill ever since then for people who have the lesser education. So this is, when people say about racism, why does this happen? Well, it happens. And why do so many African American voters vote for people who are making this happen? Okay, I'll go down the list. Number one, most of them don't realize it. They aren't really told. They're not listening to your show tonight, right? We'd like for most of them to be listening to the show, but they're not. So they're not hearing it where they are. They're not hearing it from the leaders. All the political leaders have bought in to another agenda.
Right,
So
they're being sold out by my group is being sold out by black politicians, black preachers, black talking heads. Just tell it the truth. That's the truth. They're the Cornel West, the Michael Eric Dyson, the Karen Bass, the Maxine Waters are lying to black Americans, period.
That's from the leadership. It's from especially most of the leadership you're just talking about. I do think that some other parts of the leadership are blinded by sentimentalism. It's very, very easy to work up a sermon about caring for the stranger, caring for that person who is in another country who wants to come here to better their life. And that's the point of my gumballs video, which, by the way, anybody can find if they go to our website, numbersusa.com. But my gumball videos, his main point is to point out is that there's over 5 billion people in the world, 5 billion people in the world, who are more impoverished than the average Mexican, poorer than the average Mexican. 5 billion people. Well, immigration, even at 1 million, or even Biden's 2.4 billion a year, can't touch that. The only way, if you care about people in other countries, you get involved with something that's helping people in other countries where most people live. But see, the sentimentalism is focused always on the immigrant or the person who wants to become an immigrant without looking at what that does. Is there any impact? And of course, there is an impact. And if you were forced, if a lot of these preachers, for example, were forced to look at the poverty in the black communities, the inner urban black communities of this country, and stand in the middle of there and say, I think these immigrants are more important than you. They're not only more important to you, but I'm willing to keep you from having a job in order to make me feel good about bringing in immigrants.
Right.
I'm not sure they would make that decision, but they don't have to. The media doesn't force them to think about it. The media is part of it. I think it's part of false sentimentalism, and I think a lot of people they fool themselves because it's a little bit of virtue signaling. Pushing immigration is a way for a lot of people to say, I'm more virtuous than you.
Right.
But I tell you what, Kathleen, you and I hope everybody's listening, we got to turn this around, because the moral high ground in this country is what we're going to do about the descendants of American slavery. Exactly. Who don't have jobs right now.
Right.
Or who don't make enough money in their jobs. And that is the moral priority in this country. I'll tell you something real quickly, and that is I was in a Senate hearing room back in the 90s with Senator Eugene McCarthy. Now that's not the Joe McCarthy that was the Martin McCarthy hearings in the 50s, but Eugene McCarthy, who was the presidential peace candidate in 1968, Democrat. He helped push the 65 Act through. Now, when I was in the speaking with him to an audience there at the Senate in the 90s, he said, we never intended for immigration to go up. We expected it would stay below 300,000. It was a mistake. We should have corrected it. And a reporter says, but wouldn't it be immoral to stand, when you consider our immigration tradition, wouldn't it be immoral to say no to people who are trying to better their lives to come here? And he looked at the reporter and said, listen, immigration is terrible for black Americans. And when it comes to our moral priority in this country, Black Americans, helping Black Americans who aren't making it is the most important thing, not people who want to come to the country.
I agree with you. Yeah. I agree with what he said.
Yeah. And I agree with him.
Right.
But we have to be unapologetic in speaking about that. And in some ways, I think I got to say that people like myself, who I'm not poor, I'm also not Black, we can say it because it's not our self-interest necessarily, right?
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, if there aren't enough African Americans speaking up for themselves,
exactly,
what happens is reporters will say, "Well, I'm not. Where's the Black Americans
right.
who care about it? I don't think you're right."
Right. Exactly. Why don't we take a phone call now from Linda in Burbank? Hi, Linda. Welcome to the Naked Truth Report.
Hello, Roy. There's something I want to add to what you were saying when you were talking about why Biden and the Democrats, want the illegal aliens, here, and amnesty and citizenship and all that. In addition to them getting, the Democrat vote, in addition to them getting government services, Biden ran on COVID, and he's letting all of them in here. A good amount of them have COVID, and I think he's just going to let them all in here, and what he's going to do about it is just mandate the vaccine.
So you're saying
and I'm worried about that too.
Okay, all right. So you're saying that he's feeling that by bringing in so many people, he'll bring in more people with more COVID. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, a good amount of them, that come here, they have diseases anyway.
Yeah, okay.
Well, that's a concern because he's not I guess he's going to give the vaccination to the illegal aliens that come in across the border. I don't know. Why don't we take a call? Okay, why don't we take a call from Raul now? Hi, Raul.
Mm-hmm. Well, hi, Kathleen. Thanks for taking my call. I just wanted to let your guests know about the 65 Immigration Reform Act. Teddy Kennedy was really instrumental in increasing, what I understand. I'm not an expert, but that he increased immigration from Mexico and Central America and South America with that act. And you notice how after that, I think that act was implemented in 67, and the country hasn't been the same. Because what happened, illegal immigration increased because since people were coming in legally, then their relatives wanted to come in, so they started streaming over the border. And regarding this whole issue of the illegal, I call it illegal migration, my main concern is housing. They've taken our housing away from us, our apartments, duplexes, bachelor units. No one ever talks about that. They always talk about the jobs that they take. Well, they do a lot of jobs, undesirable jobs. That's what gets kind of a little gray. There's a gray area there, because I think a lot of Americans don't want to do the jobs that the illegal migrants are doing. But like your guest has mentioned about these politicians working for, I believe my city council member Gilbert Cedillo is working for the interests of Mexico, because he dipped into the Federal CARES Act for $6 million in concert with Monica Rodriguez and Current Price, an Afro-American city council member, for $6 million to hand over to illegal migrant street vendors to legitimize them and get them their permits. And one last thing real quick on I just wanted to bring up President Jimmy Carter's message to Congress that people don't talk about back in August 4th, 1977. So I'm sure your guest knows a lot about that. He sent a message to Congress, and he asked Congress to make it illegal to hire undocumented aliens, increase enforcement of the Fair Labor Standards Act, allow undocumented aliens who had been in the U.S. since 1970 permanent resident status, and create a new temporarily resident alien status for undocumented immigrants who were in the U.S. before January 1st, 1977. Had that been enacted, and I think it would have solved a lot of the problems that we have right now. Can I ask your your guess what his opinion is of that? Of Jimmy Carter's message to Congress? He didn't actually deliver. I think he should have went on the floor and made the speech, but he just sent a message to Congress.
Well, that's very interesting history, and I must say I'm not immediately familiar with that particular desk. Although I do know that President Carter was pushing that dual thing, which eventually became the 1986 amnesty. Actually, the big problem.
Exactly, sir. Exactly.
The big problem with all of these compromises is that the compromises that happened in '86, there were about 6 more compromises in the '90s. All of them were supposed to be that there would be enforcement, and they would take away the jobs magnet. The jobs magnet was never taken away, still isn't. We don't have the mandatory verify that would take the jobs magnet away, and this is why we can't accept any kind of an amnesty that puts an amnesty first. It says, okay, we're going to give the green cards first, and we'll give you some kind of enforcement later. That never is.
Well, that's lunacy. I mean, how are you going to do that when instead of you fixing the problem, then you give out the green cards or whatever? But sir, can you respond to that? What was interesting about Carter and his approach was the violation of the Fair Labor Standards Act. How do we allow these Democrat corrupt politicians to get away with that when they're using Mexican labor in an illegal fashion to really what I look at them as slaves, basically. They're bringing them in. Gilbert Cedillo, those kind of leftist, I call them the Democrat Socialist Globalist Party, who he serves up his own people. He's Mexican American. He serves up the Mexican for cheap labor purposes, working on construction sites, working landscaping. I think that's why he got that licenses for the undocumented through, because I understand they were confiscating their trucks that had the lawnmowers and all the construction equipment because they had no license. Not because he wanted them to go and enjoy a day at the beach. He wanted to be serving them up to these contractors and this big business that want that cheap labor. Now, wouldn't you agree with that, sir?
Okay, thanks, Raul.
So, he brings up a number of things. One of the things that I'll piggyback on there is that the main reason, of course, that we had this much immigration is the cheap labor lobby, and that's you've got the business lobbies that have always pushed to keep it open. Comment was made about jobs that Americans won't do. Here's the thing: if you were not bringing in 1 million new legal immigrants a year and allowing a sieve on your border for illegal immigrants, what would the employers have to do to get people to work these jobs that supposedly are too rough to do? Well, they would have to improve the working conditions. They would find the labor. In fact, we know they do. Every time there's been a raid over the last 20 years where a company loses all of its illegal aliens, they put up a sign, they fill the slots, but they have to improve the working conditions, and they usually raise the pay. And that's the kind of country I want to live in. And I would hope, you would think that, as he said, the Democratic Party, which is the party of labor, supposedly, would look at that and go, yeah, we don't want any semi-slave jobs in this country. We want every job in this country to be an American job. Everybody, no matter what race and no matter how much education they have, should work a job and have a job that is an American standard of living, American wages, American and American benefits. Now, that doesn't mean that your lowest skilled job is going to get you into $1 million house, Kathleen. We know that. But I tell you what, we would see the wages, all of these go up. They call them essential workers. They say, oh, we've got to bring these foreign workers in because those are essential jobs and they're essential workers. Hey, if these are essential jobs and the people doing them are essential workers, then let's let them be paid like essential jobs, and they will be paid like essential jobs if you don't fill them with immigrant workers.
Right. It's quality over quantity. We want
It is.
America to be a quality country, not not just a chock full of people country.
And Kathleen, we were becoming that in the 50s and 60s.
Yes.
We were getting close. In Los Angeles, for example, the janitors in the downtown office buildings were making middle class wages. The janitors in the office buildings down there, they were almost all African American. And then the floodgates opened in the 80s. They had the amnesty, and then more and more illegal aliens came in. And what happened was the companies that hired the foreign workers underbid on the contracts. And so the companies that had unionized African American workers lost the contract.
Yeah, even Jesse Jackson was out there picketing for the illegal alien or Latino janitor workers as opposed to the black workers who were making more money, you see. Jesse Jackson. You see, blacks have been betrayed by black leaders. I keep trying to tell people. That's the thing.
And so, yeah, and that's the deal. It's like, a lot of people say, well, okay, a lot of people kind of think, well, janitorial work, that's kind of the bottom. I'll tell you what, you work in an office building, and I do. I work in an office building. We know our janitors, and we have a good relationship with them because we depend on them. We depend on them to be honest and not to steal our stuff while we're they're at night cleaning up. We depend on them, and we don't think that they ought to work like semi-slaves.
Right.
It's ridiculous. But I tell you what, most of the office workers are foreign workers now. And they're getting paid in terms of inflation adjusted a lot less than they were getting paid whenever most of them were African American workers. And by the way, everybody I've talked to, people like Will Fair, who's longtime head of the Urban League in Greater Miami, he said we used to have almost all the office workers, the hotel workers, restaurant workers in Miami were black.
Right.
Almost none of them are now. He says, I can tell you, it's not because all of those black workers are now working in the tech industry.
Exactly.
Most of them are not working.
Exactly. Also, used to in the school district, it used to be predominantly black teachers, no longer. Also, nurses used to be. My grandmother was a nurse, you see. And you can't find a black man on a construction job in Los Angeles. No. But my people don't realize what has happened, this transformation of the society, where they're not working. They're the descendants of American slaves. They should be making good money. They should be middle class. A larger percentage of blacks should be middle class because we've been here longer than anyone else, any other group. Whites and blacks have been here longer than any other group. So why is it? Yeah.
In fact, and this is something most people don't think about it. The average African American family has been in this country much longer than the average white person.
Right.
Because a large percentage of the white people, their ancestors came after 1860.
At the turn of the century. Actually, and my family came in the 1700s. Okay, so that's the end of the show, Roy Beck. I'm going to have you on again because we want to explore this issue, and now we have to really be on it because of what Biden is doing, right, Roy?
Great danger. Come to my website, numbersusa.com. We'll put you to work. Everything's free. Take some activism.
Numbers USA. Go check it out and check out the Gumdrops video. Thank you, Roy. I appreciate it. That's Roy Beck, founders of Numbers USA. We'll be back next week with some more information for my Truth Warriors. Okay, bye.